What's up, guys? Hermano Tim here. Today we're taking a look at Matthew chapter 1 2 to 19. Remember last time we just covered the very first verse, started the book of Matthew, the story of Jesus with his genealogy, telling us about the two most important ancestors of Jesus, Abraham and David. And why were these two ancestors the most important? Because God gave them two very important promises. To Abraham, he says, your descendant was going to bless the world. Jesus is going to bless the world with salvation by dying for us on a cross. God promised to David that he would establish his throne forever. We're going to talk some more about that today. However, those are not the only two ancestors of Jesus, obviously. There were many generations between Abraham and David and Jesus. And Matthew chapter 1, verses 2 to 16 are going to tell us about those generations. So let's take a look. We're going to skip through some of this, but some of these names might be familiar to you, and we can learn a lot of cool stuff here. So let's see what we find out. All right, let's go ahead and read chapter 1, verses 2 to 5. Bunch of names here, but we'll see how this goes. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. So here we see the generations all the way from Abraham to Jesse, who was the father of King David. Abraham had son Isaac. He had other sons like Ishmael, but Ishmael was not the son of promise. Isaac was. And so these promises that God made to Abraham go through Isaac. Isaac had two sons, twins in fact, Jacob and Esau. However, the Abraham promises did not go through the older son Esau, but rather to the younger son Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and all the sons of Jacob are going to be recipients of the promises to Abraham. Jacob's name was changed to Israel in the middle of his life, and so Israel becomes the father of the Israelite nation. Israel's named Israel after Israel, in fact. Of all 12 sons, Joseph, you might know him, he was the guy who got that multicolored coat and was sold into slavery into Egypt. Joseph receives the birthright, so he gets a double portion. That's why if you look at the tribes of Israel, you're not going to see a tribe of Joseph. Joseph had two sons, one Ephraim, the other Manasseh, and both of these sons received their own tribe rather than Joseph just receiving one. So in that way, there was a double portion to Joseph. However, even though all the sons of Jacob are going to be recipients of the promises to Abraham, Judah is going to be the son who gets a special promise. Back in Genesis 17, verse 6, God promised that Abraham would be the father of kings. But in the last years of Jacob's life, as he's blessing his sons, he says to Judah that he would be the father of the kings, that the kingly lineage would come from Judah. And of course, we're going to see that David and then Jesus are from the line of Judah. Skipping ahead down to verse 5, we see Boaz. Boaz might be a familiar name. We see he's connected to two non-Israelite women. One of the women is Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute who lived in Jericho who turned to Yahweh when she realized that Yahweh was going to destroy the city of Jericho. So she turns to God in faith and makes Yahweh her God. Well, Rahab becomes the father of Boaz. Well, Boaz is also connected to another non-Israelite woman. Boaz marries Ruth, the Moabitess. Ruth is the hero of the book of Ruth, where her husband, who traveled away from Israel and goes to Moabite territory, marries Ruth. And when the husband dies, Ruth actually stays faithful to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and moves back to Israel and makes Yahweh her God. She marries Boaz, and 2 generations later, we've got Jesse, the father of King David. So now we can take a look at chapter 1, verses 6 to 11. And this is going to give us the entire kingly lineage of David. Verse 6, Jesse was the father of David the king. David was the father of Salmon by Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam the father of Abijah. Abijah the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat the father of Joram. Joram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah the father of Jotham. Jotham the father of Ahaz. Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. So as we said, this follows the kingly lineage of David, obviously starting with David. And David, later in his life, wanted to build God a temple. He says, I'm living in a palace, and yet God lives in a tent. That don't seem right. Let me build God a temple So his house is nicer than my house. God says, David, I don't want you to build a temple. I want your son Solomon to build me a temple. However, I've got a good promise to make you. I'm going to raise up your descendants so that he rules on your throne forever. I'm going to establish your household forever. So here is this promise. That's a fulfillment of the promise that Jacob made to Judah way back in Genesis 49 and is fulfilled in Jesus. And Jesus, a son of David, ascends to David's throne, restores the throne, and rules on it for all eternity. David had many sons, but the son who ascends his throne is going to be Solomon, who, interestingly enough, is the son of Bathsheba, with whom he committed adultery and whose husband he actually murdered. So really exposing a dark part in David's life. So Solomon becomes the next king. He builds a temple and he lives faithfully to God for many years. However, later in life, because he married literally 1,000 women, those women, many of which were pagan, turned his heart away from Yahweh until he actually constructed pagan idol temples in his own territory. So God, being mad with Solomon, promises Solomon, I'm taking away your kingdom. However, out of respect to David, God says, I'm not going to do it during your lifetime, Solomon, but rather during the lifetime of your son, who's going to be Rehoboam. And he tells him, I'm not going to remove all of the kingdom, only most of the kingdom. So Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam assumes the throne. And by Rehoboam's foolishness, the nation splits into two. 10 tribes going to the north, being known as the northern kingdom of Israel. In the south, you've got Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin to make up the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, the first king of the northern kingdom was Jeroboam. Now, mind you, this is not a descendant of David, so this dynasty promise was not given to him. So, in the northern kingdom, because of their wickedness, we see that it's a very tumultuous nation, and there are no less than 9 different dynasties that span only 200 years. Some dynasties only lasting literally months. However, in the south, they are protected by this promise that God made to David. So there is only one single dynasty that rules over all 300 years of Judah's history. That is the line of David, even though that lineage was reduced to a single heir on at least 2 occasions. And so they have this promise, and God keeps that to them. However, we're going to see that because they were so wicked, God does in fact remove the kings from the throne in Jerusalem, which he will later restore during the time of Jesus. Skipping ahead to verse 10, we've got Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good Judean king. He was in fact the ruling king of Judah when Assyria came and destroyed Israel and took Israel into captivity. Hezekiah, by his prayers and the help of Isaiah, they survived the Assyrian siege and lasted about another 100 years after that. However, Hezekiah's son Manasseh was about the worst king that ever was, to the point that he burned his own children alive as a sacrifice to a pagan god. Because of his wickedness, God says, that's it. Nation is destined to destruction. Well, he has a son named Amon. Amon has a son named Josiah. Josiah was maybe the best king ever. He might even be better than David. And he really does a lot to restore the Judean kingdom back to God, but there's only so much one man can do. And when he dies, very quickly, the kingdom plummets into wickedness and is ultimately destroyed. You see, in verse 11, we've got Jeconiah. He was taken into the second Babylonian captivity along with Ezekiel. When he was taken into captivity, then his uncle Zedekiah was put on the throne in Jerusalem, who ruled about 11 years until Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar completely destroyed Jerusalem, burned down the temple, laid waste to everything. Now, verses 12 down to 16 are going to tell us about the captivity, the restoration up until the days of Jesus. Verse 12 says, after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel became the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud. Abihud was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim was the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Achim. Achim was the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar the father of Mathan. And Mathan was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. So Jeconiah, taken into captivity. Shealtiel would have lived in captivity, but his son Zerubbabel was one of the leaders that returned back to the land of Canaan by the decree of the Persian Empire. The Persians had conquered the Babylon. Persians want to send the Jews back to their homeland. Zerubbabel was a great judge and leader during that time. And so there are other generations that follow after they had returned to the kingdom until we finally get to verse 16, where we see Jacob and Mary, the parents of Jesus, and thus we have Jesus Christ the Messiah being born. Verse 17 is really a summary of the whole genealogy. It says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. And so Matthew is telling us there are 3 phases of 14 generations that lead up to the coming of Jesus Christ. Now, if you compare that to other genealogies, you're going to see that it's not really 14, 14, and 14. There are some generations that are not included in this genealogy. This genealogy isn't giving an absolute comprehensive listing of all the ancestors of Jesus, but certainly most, and hitting the highlights. So this takes us all the way to the actual birth of Jesus Christ in verses 18 and 19. Let's see what it says. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they had come together, she was found to be with child by the Holy Spirit. And Joseph, her husband, being a righteous man, and not wanting to disgrace her, planned to send her away secretly. So Mary is engaged to Joseph. They're not married yet, but they're planning on it. And then one day she realizes that she's pregnant. Joseph also realizes that she's pregnant. Joseph says to himself, well, that wasn't me. So clearly my fiance has been unfaithful to me. I don't think I want to marry her after all, which is not a bad decision to make. However, as he is going to put away his fiancée Mary, it says he does so discreetly, not making a scene. That's an important detail because think about this. If you were engaged to someone and then they cheat on you, you would be very incensed. You'd be angry. You would be hurt. You would want to take revenge, perhaps. And so you would tell everybody about how wicked this girl is, how much she messed you up. You call up Mari and you go on TV and tell the whole world about all the evil that she did as a form of getting revenge, as getting payback. However, Joseph did not see the need to do that. He says, okay, she was unfaithful to me, but I don't need to take my own revenge. I'm going to not marry her, but I don't need to defame her in the process. And so all the things that Jesus is going to teach about loving your enemies, not returning evil for evil, his own earthly adopted father, as it were, Joseph, was already putting those teachings into practice, giving us an idea of perhaps why God selected Joseph and Mary to be the earthly parents of Jesus. Well, covered a lot today. Hope it was helpful. God bless.